too in the bottom, so people would be able to go to your website and check out your books and learn more about this important work that you're doing. Let's see. I think we're probably live.
It says, it's indicating to me that we're live.
It is. Okay, great. Awesome. Okay, so hello out there. This is Genevieve Anderson. I'm the writer-director of DUSTWUN, and I'm here today with Todd Miller as part of our Talk About Immigration series, which we've been doing with people from the immigration advocacy community in Southern Arizona and beyond in an effort to educate and illuminate the issues surrounding what's going on at the southern border right now. And in light of the coming election, we want to help people understand a little bit more about what's at stake and you know, who's most at risk. So I am personally super, super excited to be with you today, Todd, because I am a big fan of your work. As I mentioned, I've seen you speak twice in Southern Arizona, and recently you gave a talk as part of a series on borders that the University of Arizona was doing, and I was there for that as well. I'm riveted by what you're doing. The first book I read was this one, Storming the Wall, in 2017, and there was so much that you cover in there that I had no idea, you know, what's actually really going on beyond just the physical borders themselves. And this book, which we're going to talk about today, Empire of Borders, which I highly, highly recommend, is just a deeper investigation of sort of the expansion of the border system and what is happening with basically the homeland security sort of industry, surveillance and technology and all of, there's so much going on that again, that I had no idea about. So, so first off, the physical borders. So it's since 9/11, the number of physical borders have grown exponentially. I think you said that after the fall of the Berlin Wall, there were about 15, right?
Yeah.
And now there's somewhat like 77 walls, 2/3 of which have gone up since 9/11. So that's a startling statistic, but more than the actual physical borders and the walls, what your book does is uncover the system of bordering. In the beginning, you're quoting Paul Kurian, who says the border has become the new anti-ballistic missile system, that it is a weapon of the powerful deployed against the displaced and the dispossessed, the most important and the most hidden battlefield of the 21st century. This blew me away. So what I want to do with you is talk about the hidden part, because I think most people don't even understand that Trump's wall is actually being built at $42 million a mile. Most people don't understand the kind of ecological and cultural damage it's creating right now. So we don't understand that, let alone what's happening behind all of that and within the machinery of border imperialism, basically. So your goal with the book is not to bum people out at all, right? And it isn't, but it's to, the goal with it, you say, is to investigate who the border is actually protecting, right? Who's profiting by it, what it means for the geopolitics of a 21st century mired not only in endemic inequality, but also persistent ecological disaster. And then you investigate who is challenging it and who is organizing against it. So before we get into this, I'm focusing on the US-Mexico border, obviously, because that's where my movie takes place and most of the people that I've been talking to are in Southern Arizona. But this book is expansive. It starts in Central America. You go to Israel, Palestine, where the US is training and arming other nations' border systems. You go to Kenya, Puerto Rico, Manila Bay, and the Philippines. You say all examples of the radicalized colonial history of political borders and how they are embedded in the concept of private property. And you had a revelation. I thought this was also really, really telling when you were in Ramtha, Jordan, that you finally saw these border systems as a shoot anything that moves border of the future, necessary to maintain the status quo of a segregated, unsustainable world. So this is an expansive study of border systems throughout the world. So let's start by talking about displacement and migration, and some of the reasons that that this global catastrophe is happening. That is a question that I want to just kind of throw in a couple of statistics from the book too, because I think this is important. That according to the United Nations, so right now there's over 1 billion people on the move. That's 1 in 7 people. And the number of people crossing borders without papers is up 41% in the past 15 years. The UN records a record number, 65.6 million people forcibly displaced from their homes in 2016. 8,000 people were killed in 2016 crossing borders, which is a 47% increase from the year before. In Mexico alone, we know that thousands of people die every year crossing the desert to get from from Mexico into the United States, accounting or amounting to what the Mesoamerican migrant movement calls a migrant Holocaust. This is awful. Like, these statistics are they're hard to comprehend. But what is even harder to comprehend, before we go into talking about the reasons for this displacement, is what you say right after this. When you talk about columnist William Lind of the American Conservative suggesting that immigration should be treated as an act of war. He says that invasion by immigration can be at least as dangerous as invasion by a state army. And what this does is blur the line between combatant and civilian, making crossing the border basically a terrorist act, an act of war. And as we know, this narrative is necessary for promulgating, and the lie that that we need these borders in the first place, or that we are under imminent threat from people who are merely seeking safety and protection. So it's a lot to digest. So talk a little bit about why this migration is happening, why people are forcibly displaced from their homes.
Sure. First, just thanks for having me on, Genevieve. It's really an honor to be here talking with you today, and I'm just very pleased to be here to be able to talk about this and Empire of Borders. So thank you. And yeah, I mean, one of the, when you think about why we're having such massive displacements in this moment on the globe, I guess there's a number of factors to look at. One thing I like to look at, just to kind of turn the tables on something, like you have the word open borders that's out there, right? There's an open, but when you think about open borders, you're almost the mind, or it's at least in the media, it's often puts like, oh, the open borders are for the people who have been displaced who are crossing borders, and it's not the other way around. It's not like, if you could think in the case of the United States, there's open borders for its military to go to have military bases in 800 different countries, and actually do military operations in some of those countries. And and as we know, war is one of the causes of displacement, right? You have what the UN figure of 65 million people comes from people fleeing war, right? That's one of the stats they use. And then you have an open borders for corporations, right? You have different companies that can go, they can cross the border. There's no border patrol stopping a mining company, one of the hundreds of mining companies working in Mexico or Central America, often going into communities and almost always taking over water supplies, because to mine, you need tons of water, and the use of cyanide to extract the wealth. So what happens is the natural wealth of a community, right, what's under the ground, and then you have a poisoning of the water supply that often happens with using chemicals, and like cyanide, right? Everyone knows cyanide is very poisonous. And so you have communities that are organizing and protesting mining operations, and this is just one example of many. and having to leave their communities because they no longer can drink their water, or there's a water that's drying, it's drying up. Or you can think about greenhouse gas emissions. Greenhouse gas emissions also have there's no borders for that, right? If the United States has 700 times more greenhouse gas emissions than Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador combined since 1900, 700 times more. So that's just like an astronomically more impact to the atmosphere, impact to the gases that are trapping heat in the atmosphere and creating the warming effects, the heating effects that we're seeing. And now we're like, if we just look at Central America, which is, obviously that's a place where lots of people are coming up to the US border, it's having tremendous devastating effects on people, especially in places like the dry corridor, where droughts and farmers who are often already marginalized, right? So you have to think of all kinds of different factors, like the economic factors, the history of, you have to think of the history of Central America, right? If you go back to the United States crossing borders, the United States has crossed borders to support military dictatorships and sent arms to different Central American countries.
Right.
And so you have this, and then you have now an ecological catastrophe in the making. So one, Christian Parenti, who's a sociologist, calls it a catastrophic convergence, right? You have economic, political, social, all these crises that are converging, and then now on top of all of that, and he writes this in his book Tropic of Chaos, which came out, I believe, in 2011. So it's a very prescient book. But on top of all of that, you have an ecological crisis that all kind of goes together, and he calls it a catastrophic convergence. And one of the things that happens with that convergence, say if you're a farmer in Guatemala and the rains don't come and you have no money, then you're in a food crisis or a crisis. There's a food crisis, really. You have to figure out what to do. Do you try to plant more? Do you go to the Guatemala city and try to get a job, or do you head north to Mexico, or do you go to the United States? And so there's so many different factors going on in why people are displaced. But I like to frame it a lot in the open borders, because the United States is actually crossing borders all the time. And but at the same time, the United States is I use the United States example because it is fortifying its borders in such a massive way. So it's both crossing and fortifying its borders to the people who are dispossessed, to the people who are displaced, and then not only on the U.S.-Mexico border, as you mentioned, but actually spreading now into the world, into the greater world.
Yeah, it's so arresting. It's so arresting because all I keep thinking about is why don't we care? Why don't we care more about this? Because it feels like a death drive. It's overt destruction, overt displacement, and then negation of the consequence, absolute negation of the consequence. To the tune of these massive walls, refusing to sort of acknowledge, what we are, very, very intentionally participating in. So for me, that's something that's really hard to understand. I'm curious what, being all over the world and encountering these systems in different cultures and how people are responding to the construction of walls and the infrastructure of bordering, which does give people jobs, right? But it also fractures communities and, it alters our experience of living, from the ground up. So how are people coping with this? I mean, universally, how are people coping with this? Are they grasping the big picture, do you think? Are they just looking, at what is right in front of them?
Well, it depends where you are. I think in the introduction, you definitely you raised the question of it often being hidden, and it is.
Yeah.
It's remarkable how hidden it is. For example, when I went to Jordan to look at, I wanted to go to the Jordanian Syrian border wall system that was being constructed, and right. I tell you, I couldn't do it on my own. They would not allow me. Nobody would allow me to go up there. And then I had to, I talked with a number of fixers, and fixers are people that you talk with when you do journalism, sometimes in other countries, if you need to, who will help you facilitate an experience. And every fixer said, no, we don't go there. It's like, no
Wow.
way, we're not going there. We're not. And finally, I found one who agreed to do it. And so we went there, but it was after, like, nobody wanted anyone to see this, right? It was in the zone that was untouchable, unseeable. And what I had to do was actually literally go there and literally go into the border zone and literally kind of then see it with my own eyes. And so at one point it's super hidden, right? And then on the other hand, that's exactly where the quote came from, the major general that you mentioned earlier, who said, we are enacting a policy at shoot at anything that moves. And which was then, what is that, the future of bordering or border policing? Are we
Sure.
going to shoot at anything that moves sort of policy? That's where I heard that quote from the
Wow.
general. So the people who are from Syria, and they're massively displaced. We know there's a displacement crisis of epic proportions in Syria.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of factors too, right? There's there's a huge conflict, but there's also the climate, the droughts, and there's a number of different factors of being bombed by not only the conflict inside, but different foreign actors that are bombing, including the United States, that have bombed Syria. So you have
Mhm.
all these factors that are happening, leading to this huge displacement crisis. And while on one hand, the border apparatus, and in this case, on the Syrian border, you have a $300 million contract going to the Raytheon Corporation, who
Right.
has been given a contract to build a border wall system there of excuse me, of surveillance towers and like, almost like, if for people in southern Arizona, the integrated fixed towers that we're seeing being constructed throughout southern Arizona. There's 50 of them, and the whole
Wow.
idea is they form like a technological kind of wall, a barrier that sees really, with cameras that can see 10 miles away at night, infrared systems, ground sweeping radar, so much that the major general said we could sit there and sip our coffees and smoke our cigarettes and look and I'm quoting him literally, and watch somebody 20 miles away coming at us, and just wait and wait and wait, and then pounce, when they get near us. So you have on one hand a system that is untouchable and unseeable. On the other hand, a system that is dreadfully impacting, right? People are getting shot, usually in their knees, like the
Oh
shoot at
my
anything
God.
in their knees, right? Um, and people, these refugee camps, there's one called the Berm, that exploded from 10,000 to 100,000 Syrians on the Jordanian border in a year, right? So it's like they can't cross, and so it's not unseeable or not untouchable. It's touching them very directly. It's physically violent, right? And so you have this like contrast. So people in Jordan don't necessarily see it unless you're Syrian, who gets across.
Right.
And I would say that's a very similar dynamic you see on almost all borders, right? One last point, and then I'll be quiet. But one of the things about the Trump wall is that like, as construction is going on now, as these 30-foot high bollard walls are being constructed through southern Arizona, and all their ecological and human devastation. There was also 700 miles of walls and barriers before Trump ever set foot in the White House.
Right.
So that very few people actually knew about. So Trump could actually campaign on building a wall, and most of the people in the country thought there was no such wall, when there actually was. That when there actually has been a prevention through deterrence strategy on the U.S.-Mexico border since
Yeah.
1994, where the enforcement apparatus has been built up, and people have been funneling into the desert areas, and people have been dying, and people just don't know about any of that, right? They don't know about the border deaths, they don't know about the walls, and thus Trump campaign in 2016, I'm talking, can say,
Yeah.
oh, nothing has been done, quote unquote, and we can go in and we're going to stop people from coming over, when it's been a deadly built up endeavor for a long time before he even set foot in office. And so it's both, again, hidden to the people of the United States, and not everyone, but like in a mainstream sort of way. And then for the people crossing, it's like it's palpably violent because the death, the damage that is often inflicted on people who cross.
What do you make of the new wall? I've seen some images of it, and obviously, again, it's about perpetuating a narrative, building a wall, big, beautiful wall, and then promulgating the narrative about we're being infiltrated by too many people who want to come into this country. And anyway, so it all makes sense. We have this visual of this big, gorgeous wall, and all these people coming, and we know now, of course, that all the people that were coming, especially through Central America, they didn't storm the wall. We didn't need, all that concertina wire. Even the people putting it up, they were calling it, Operation Border Security, and they had to stop calling it that because the people, the servicemen who were putting it up were calling it Operation BS, right? Because it wasn't about anything. It was about show. What is this wall, this big one? What is it actually about? I mean, it's already keeping people out. So why do we need a new one? Why do we need more?
Yeah, I guess that's the question of the Trump administration, right? I interpret it. I mean, for one, it does. I mean, you can't. I mean, it is building upon what has already been built. So there is that part of it. The wall itself is part of it's, if you talk to Border Patrol, they'll immediately start talking about it's a border wall system, right? The wall is one part of it, it's a barrier, but then it's reinforced. It would never work without the agents work, according to Border, and what they mean by work, and then reinforced by the technologies. So it's a border wall system, and all of that, as you just mentioned, has been really, and not only built up, it's been dramatically, historically built up, even before Trump took office. But at the same time, he has this thing where he made the campaign promise, and this is where I think your analysis of is spot on, right? About there's a show going on. So he has this campaign promise that says, I'm going to build this border wall. And now we have the 2020 elections, which is, I can't believe it. I can't believe my own eyes as I look at the calendar and see that it's less than a week away. That's coming right down the pipe. And so the wall then becomes a massive, in my opinion, it is in reinforcing the system and its ecological devastation. And it probably helps force people even into more dangerous and desolate territories. That probably is an impact of it. But at the same time, it's like a campaign ad in a way, a gigantic physical one, which every time Trump comes to Arizona, he'll go to Yuma and stand in front of the wall and touch the wall and put an engravement of his name on the wall or sign something or do something, right? It's like I am doing this. I am fulfilling my promise. Another 4 years, I will continue to fulfill my promise. So what we see as horrific images of saguaros being chopped into pieces and thrown on these like bulldozed dirt roads, making way for more wall, are also like to his constituency, like the job being done, right? And so I think it fits into that, like I am building a huge wall. It's all going into really rural areas, right? So areas that have been used by prevention through deterrence that are very difficult to cross anyhow. Right. And so those are areas where the desert has been weaponized, right, already. And here's the Trump administration just building more and more. One that's really, there's all of them, like Quito Baquito Springs, of course, is sacred to the Atum. And also there's the San Bernardino Wildlife Refuge, which I wrote about in Storming the Wall. It's the place where the water table has been going up because they've been doing water harvesting. And it's just unbelievable that they're building this huge wall there. And they're drying out the water supply, the very water supply that I was writing about in Storming the Wall as one of the hope, one of those places of hope, right? So I don't know. I think that's a long-winded way of saying I think you're right. You're spot on in thinking that there's a lot to look at, in terms of it being like a show. It's yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit more about the constitution-free zones, the extra constitutional powers, and the Border Patrol being exempt from the Fourth Amendment. Because obviously we're seeing this in not only in it's Aravaca, right, in the No More Deaths camp, which has been invaded repeatedly and with, tanks and chopters and whatnot, but the same kind of, massive federal force in areas of protest, notably in Portland, but certainly beyond. So what is that about? It's terrifying, but how is it justified?
Yeah, so it actually goes into the whole theme of bordering again. Like we think the border is this thing that's on an international boundary line, and it is, right? An international boundary line is the border,
Right.
but it's only one part of it, and what is a border system, and one part of the U.S. border system, and I would argue, like border systems around the world now, is that it's not only the border, but the border itself forms a border zone. In terms of the U.S., it's a 100-mile zone, so that was determined by the Supreme Court, I believe, that determined a reasonable distance of patrolling the border is 100 miles, and they determined that in,
Okay.
100 miles going from the U.S. boundary, the 2,000-mile U.S.-Mexico boundary inland, the 4,000, 5,000-mile Canadian boundary going inland, and along the coast. The coasts are very much included in that. And so that means the border is already more than, so if people could imagine, right, like the country and the contours of the United States, and just imagine an orange band going along the contours, up the coast, up the northern border, the eastern coast, the southern border, and along the Gulf of Mexico too. That is border jurisdiction. Border Patrol, Department of Homeland Security can work in those areas. And in those areas, they have what they call extra constitutional powers. That means that they can put up immigration checkpoints, really. And they can put up checkpoints, and supposedly they're limited to asking people for their citizenship. But anyone who lives near any of these checkpoints in the 100-mile zones know that often that goes beyond that, especially if you're a person of color, and the sort of like profiling that happens, which, by the way, when the Obama administration was trying to put some racial profiling ordinances in different departments in, I believe it was 2015 or 2016, I can't remember the exact year, or 2014. But anyhow, the Obama administration went to the Department of Homeland Security, and they argued that they couldn't put a profiling ordinance because they depend on ethnic profiling as part of its job, right? So that's one of the things that happens in the 100-mile zones. And so you have these zones, and the ACLU has been backtracking really on saying they use the term constitution free zone, but now I think they want to emphasize that I use a term almost like constitution mangled zone or constitution challenge zone, because you still have your constitutional rights, but at the same time you have the Border Patrol or Homeland Security working in this kind of extra constitutional power. So you have this kind of conflict, and so that's what's being seen, right? So you have the suspension, almost as kind of a state of exception, to use a military term, or a state of emergency. And that then, if you think about how much that covers, if you think about that orange band around the United States, that's like 2/3 of the population, 200 million people, and includes like the city of Portland. And so when you have Border Patrol agents, BORTAC, which is our special forces unit, in there over the summer, that are in nondescript vehicles pulling protesters and putting them in and detaining them, that's like within the 100-mile zone. It's in this zone where there's a kind of a suspension or a challenge or a mangling of the Constitution. And really what they're doing is the same exact thing they do with undocumented people constantly in the borderlands that will snatch people, put them in vans, arrest them, detain them, even at times disappear. People disappear, right? Or they get detained and then deported, separated from their families, and that sort of thing. And now, the interesting thing about Portland is that, oh, now you're seeing that expansion and how it will look, as it goes to other places and it's used with people who are dissenting or protesters or other. I mean, how many other ways can it be used? And that's not only in Portland, right? There was drones sent over Minneapolis after the George Floyd killing in early June. There was U.S. Border Patrol deployed in Washington, D.C., also during protests in June. So you can see if there's a national, there's like, as we were seeing in June and July specifically, there was millions of people going to the streets. All of a sudden you have Border Patrol out in many of those cities. And that is another thing that should be of concern, right? For people. People are finally seeing like what this agency is doing, capable of doing and doing.
Well, it brings up the question, and just before that, just as anecdotally, when we were doing our film, I had great experience with Border Patrol. I have a stepbrother in Border Patrol who, is really helpful. But ICE, wow, we got stuck in the border in Sassabee. We're just driving through, and we had to turn around and come back through, and nobody was there. And it's crazy, place. Anyway, it feels like the edge of the world. And as we pulled through, kind of peeking around, trying to drive back, into town, away from the border, 10 guys come out of the office, the inner, the intersection, and it was my DP and I, and they just came to the car. They didn't say anything. They opened the car up, and then someone came around to the window. What are you doing? What were you doing in Mexico? Oh, we weren't in Mexico. We were just making a U-turn right here and pulling everything out of our car. They didn't ask. They didn't say, now we're going to search you, whatever. It was like, we had no rights. And so firsthand, I experienced that sense of like, what? Why don't I have any rights here? I don't have any. I'm not even treated like a person. So, and I'm, a whitey, there was no racial profiling going on. It was just, I had no rights, and it was really unnerving. But going back into I was thinking about policy borders. We talk about systemic racism and the inequalities in the United States, with people of color, women, and I'm thinking about this as like policy borders. Policy borders, keeping people segregated and secure, and making sure that that income and racial inequity is maintained. So as these lines are becoming in a way more transparent through, recently the George Floyd killing and these protests and whatnot, people are kind of rising up at the same time that this system, this whole military industrial surveillance border system is rising. What do you see for what do you see for that system? How is that system going to continue to enforce borders within the United States between the haves and the have-nots?
I mean, I think it's been in constant expansion. Really, if you look at, like, you can go back to the 1980 and you see like a border and immigration enforcement budget of about $300 million. And you go to 2024, 2020. What am I doing? I'm jumping ahead. 2020, and you see there's an annual budget this year of $25 billion. It's more than a 6,000% increase since 1980. And you go through the years, and every year it increases. And there's some phases where it increases really in dramatic fashion. One was the 1990s, during the Clinton administration, when there was Operation Gatekeeper, Operation Safeguard, Operation Hold the Line, when prevention through deterrence, the strategy that I mentioned earlier of blockading, towns and forcing people in the desert, that's when that was implemented. And you see that reflected in the budgets. You see that reflected in the amount of surveillance technologies. You see that reflected in the number of Border Patrol. It went from 4,000 in 1994 to nearly 10,000 by the time that Clinton left office. And then you have this post 9/11, when 9/11 came, and that's when major shifts happen. Before, well, the priority mission became counterterrorism and stopping weapons of mass destruction from crossing the border, which stuff that's never happened, but that became the priority mission. And also these budgets, just the coffers just filled up and filled up and filled up and filled up. And you just see during the George W. Bush administration and the Obama administration, and then up and through the Trump administration, especially, they get bigger and bigger and more constantly. And so when you try to predict the future of how this is working, there's no other indication to me, looking at just the budgets alone, that the 6,000% increase that you see from 1980 to now, that they won't continue to increase. And it really doesn't matter who the president is. I mean, it keeps happening. It just keeps increasing. I would argue there's a complex that's happening of growth, and that happens with monetary budgets, but the expanding budgets means the expanding of the apparatus, right? That means it's more in more places than it ever was before, and including the North. I am from Buffalo, New York, and when I go there now, I see more Border Patrol than I'd ever seen growing up. And there's a Border Patrol station in Rochester, which there was never a Border Patrol station there before. Erie, Pennsylvania. You know, there's places where there's Border Patrol stations that there never has been before. And now you have agents that go on to Amtrak trains and go on to Greyhound buses, and you know, kind of like the checkpoint system that's even in the north of the United States. It's different than the South, and it's not as much, but it's happening. And that sort of expansion is like every time the budgets go up, the capabilities grow, right? Certain areas get reinforced, but then you can expand and expand. In a way, Trump's wall is an expansion, right? It's moving the wall further and further into these rural areas. And that's not to mention the outward expansion, which I would argue is really the top border policy thing right now. This pushing out of the border, expanding the border, going to other places, pressuring other countries to build up their borders, and literally stopping people thousands of miles before they even come close to the United States.
Yeah, I guess then I should ask you now about this chapter was fascinating. The one about the just the intricate mechanics of, you know, how we're going to border without borders, right? So can you talk a little bit about silhouetting, right? Extreme vetting, biometrics, happy flow. These are all like words out of a science fiction movie, but
right.
And that how it relates to the global border and the global caste system.
Yeah, sure. That came out of a chapter where I was looking at a Trumpian term of extreme vetting, right? What I was looking at in that chapter is extreme vetting. It was used by Trump very, you know, overtly, but it's also been something that's been a part of the Department of Homeland Security really for a long time, really since 9/11. Increasing the capabilities of extending its kind of surveillance, intelligence gathering apparatus all around the world, right? And so one of the things that I did for Empire of Borders was I went to so many different Homeland Security conventions in many different places in the United States, but also one in Tel Aviv in Israel, one in Paris, France, one in Mexico City, and in those different places, you just see this kind of fusion between different companies that are developing all kinds of. It really truly is like going into a science fiction cathedral, like a place where the future is being imagined. And you have like different companies that are developing all kinds of really high tech new technologies, and that they range from drone systems and robots. You see like robots crawling on the ground, to like camera systems and radar systems, to this kind of biometric, high-tech biometric, and by biometrics, they mean, fingerprinting, but also facial recognition,
Right.
iris recognition, and then the connecting databases with, so it's a way to identify you and then connect you with these databases. And one of the biggest things that's going on right now is facial recognition. And so you have that, the facial recognition, and then the silhouette that you just mentioned is a term that I got from one of the companies who I talked to and I saw speak, and I tried to interview, and there's all kinds of funny little aside stories I could tell about writing Empire of Borders, of trying to interview people and then realizing that they don't want to reveal too much and
Wow.
stopping the interview. But not because I go into every interview very, very, like I'm just like, I'm curious to know about what you have and what this is. And then, but when you're talking with the security stuff, the doors come down, the iron walls go up pretty quickly. But in the case of the silhouette, it was a company that was developing technology around biometrics, but also around this kind of expansion of where countries or the kind of national security state can see like who's a threat, right? So if it connects, it could connect facial recognition, like some camera gets your face, and then your database shows a whole like profile of you, and that's your silhouette, and that's everything that you've done online, everything, who, like, what your interests are, what your hobbies are, where you've gone, the sort of fleshing out of who you are. And then then it's determined whether if you're a target or not, if you should be questioned or not, if you should just be left on your way. And why this is one company, but the company was describing something that actually is happening. There's, since 9/11, there's this, what CBP has developed, a national targeting center. So if anytime you have flown from anywhere abroad, you have been vetted by this national targeting center. They have looked at you. They probably looked at where you've gone. If there's a red flag, they flesh it out even more. They'll do, at one point when people were flying a lot, I think they did millions of profiles a day. And then if there's something about you, they might look into you more or put you into secondary inspection, or they have partnerships with airlines. They could suggest to an airline that they don't let you on the airplane, and that's happened to people. And so there's this kind of whole system, and this is part of the extension of the border system, where it extends in ways like not only like walls and border patrols and all that, but also in this kind of biometric, this kind of vetting, this determination if you can travel or not. And as we know with extreme vetting, if you're from a particular country, you're automatically,
Right.
doesn't even matter who you are. And if you've gone to that country as a traveler, you're gonna get it, right? If you've gone to Syria, for example, you're going to get secondary inspection, even if it doesn't even matter why. If your grandmother lives in Syria and you went to Syria, it doesn't matter. You're going to get it just because that sets it off. And so this sort of criteria of who is singled out and who isn't. And it's like, it is, again, like what you said at the port of entry, when you come across the port of entry and all your rights are suspended. In a way, this is like this questioning, like somebody is not literally going through your car or questioning you right there, but it's literally going through your car as if your digital footprint, your silhouette was your car. So going through every part of your trunk, opening your trunk of what you leave online, and what it indicates of where you've gone and where you haven't gone and who you've talked to and what your interests are and all that.
And it becomes problematic, it seems, when this information is being compiled by artificial intelligence and then being interpreted by people. And as you mentioned, an instance in the book, you were in Africa, I think, wasn't it? There was a man and his family, and he was like I want to say like an orthodontist or something, and he was prevented from coming in because his country had flagged him for some reason, and it wasn't necessarily, I mean, obviously he wasn't a terrorist, but so the margin for error utilizing these technologies to try to pre-assess somebody's history and their personality are deeply flawed. That's the problem. on the upside, you'd think like this, you know, the fundamentalist who stabbed all those people in the church in God, what was it, in France just a few days ago? You think about like those kind of terrorist acts, and you want to find those guys. Like you hope that the system is finding those guys and keeping them, the people who are actually creating terrorist acts. And I guess that's the idea, is that it's going to catch the bad people, but in the interim, right, there's all these negative consequences to having that kind of an intricate AI driven border system in place, basically, right? It's I think there's probably more potential for bad than good, would you say?
I mean, I see it as it's like a part of a whole sweeping surveillance apparatus that that you know that probably has very low probability of actually preventing some sort of violent act from happening, and more just I mean, it's going to, you know, it's just gonna, like, it serves as another part of a border blockade. That's what I mean. I don't like, if there's a violent act and there are people that are determined to do that act, it seems like this sort of massive surveillance system, maybe there will be a small like quote unquote success of being able to stop that. But I find that really dubious. I think it's more, it's almost like a prevention through deterrence. It's like whatever,
Yeah.
These kind of wholesale, I mean, this is what caused people to like people that were flying from different countries like Assyria, or different, countries that are put on the list that they're told that they can't go and see their family in the United States, and that's why people end up going and protesting in the airports. That's the sort of thing that I see happening more in this sense. And I know that like the rhetoric is definitely what you say. It's definitely that, oh, we're going to be able to stop these things from happening.
Right.
But I mean, that's also the claim of the border, like,
Right.
and everything, like, oh, we're stopping, all these things that aren't even true. People coming over to commit crimes and kill our, steal our jobs. All these things that are always constantly put out to reinforce what the border is. It's on, and I view this in the same kind of cut from the same cloth. Um, I mean, when you think, I think like the idea of why people would do a violent act and that sort of thing needs serious consideration, and
Mhm.
and um and and that probably would just merit a whole other conversation, and
Yeah.
like another hour and a half to really think about that in depthly, and what would help prevent that, or what sort of things that can be enacted in the world. But it seems to me that this particular thing really just fits into a border apparatus, and
Right.
an extension therein.
And then, so then going a little bit deeper into who the borders are really, really for, what it's really about. You say that they're being fortified as a defense against the poor, ultimately, right? So this is also within the United States, again, policy borders, right? But the actual border systems keeping people who are increasingly in need from getting the help that they need. And was a quote too that was arresting to me, that borders are not simply a consequence of neoliberalism, they are also productive of it. So I'm wondering if you can unpack that statement a little bit more.
Sure. I like to think of borders in a way as, almost a kind of scaffolding. If you look at the globe, and especially when I think of like the extension of U.S. borders, it's the U.S. border, like they've been doing trainings in over 100 countries, right? And this extension, but it's almost like a scaffolding. But it's not only the U.S. The European Union has very much been extending its borders. Australia has been extending its borders. Different, and this kind of scaffolding of in the globe, and it keeps people, quote unquote, in their places, right? So it scaffolding in the sense of you cannot look at the world right now and not see how that it is completely destabilized. And when you could look at a number of different factors. One of course is inequality. The inequality that's happening of the haves and the have-nots, and who has wealth and who does not in terms of economic wealth. And the numbers are just incredibly incredible how many billionaires are compared to like how many people are struggling. I think there's over 4.1 billion people who are making under $7 a day. And that's like, if you're in Nogales, Sonora, and you make, if you work on a line worker in a maquila, you probably make $8 or $9 a day, and a gallon of milk's going to cost like $3 or $4. So that's a half day's work, right? It doesn't. My point is, it doesn't even come close to meeting a market basket for a family, and that's a worldwide phenomenon. When you have 4.1 billion people who are making less than $7 a day, that's a lot of people. And then I think there was the stat I saw where the CEO of a garment company was making like 14,000 times more than a garment worker in Bangladesh. Or I can't remember if it was 14. It was in the like 12,000 or 14,000. I can't remember. It's in the book, actually, the exact stat. But those sorts of stats are like, wow, that's part of the thing that's out there, but it's hidden. And one of the ways it's hidden is the borders keep everything separate and try to manage those tensions. And the other thing is the increasing ecological displacement, as we were, that what we are definitively now, and through the 2010s, now in the 2020, we are in the era of massive climate change. You see it all the time. The wildfires in California being the thing that pops in my head, or the record hurricane season in the Atlantic. This hurricane that just hit New Orleans just like yesterday. I believe I saw a stat that more than 10,000 homes were burned down in California just this year due to these wildfires. Everything, like, this is just United States. The stuff that happens in other countries we just don't even hear about. And for a world to be kept in place, like where the system keeps working, where again the world of have and have nots, that we still continue business as usual, for that to happen, there has to be a scaffolding thing. People have, like, if people are being displaced massively, there has to be some sort of thing that manages them, keeps them divided. The last thing that anybody wants is people coming together and having like an uprising that changes everything. It very might well happen, but the border system literally plays into this. It plays into, like, if you look at CBP and their mission, it's to stop people from crossing the border, right? That's one thing, what they call unlawful entries. And then it's also to keep the economy flowing. So you have those two parts of it. So you have this, keep business as usual moving as it is, and that could mean, from a Southern Arizona perspective, keep the maquila worker making $7, $8 an hour over, making Samsonite suitcases or anything that they make in Nogales, or the General Electric plant light bulbs or bank pens, or I've been to like at least 24 maquilas and Nogales are making all kinds of stuff that supply our global economy, and it's part of the global economy, right? It comes in to keep everyone in their place, keep the wages low, keep the profits high, and business as usual. And the borders are definitely, they help stabilize a world that's definitely at tipping points of instability.
Right. Right. And continuing, I like this term that you used, constructive blurring, as a strategy to simultaneously obfuscate and naturalize the facts of domination and all of the ways that's occurring in news media, certainly by polarizing people into these different political camps.
Yeah.
They're thinking less about the underlying motor, like the underlying structure of everything, and more about just what's happening on the surface and about fighting. As long as we're fighting, we're actually not going to be talking about the more systemic problems. But the question becomes then, you say regardless of who becomes president, this system it's burgeoning. It's a huge economy. So it's not likely to turn the other way. It's not likely. It's likely to keep growing. What are we to do?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things we can do. I think there's a zillion things we can do, and I mean one thing probably is the election is coming up and right, it's going to keep happening, and if you look at Biden and his kind of immigration border platform, the good thing about it is that he says that he will reverse everything that Trump did. So so voting for Biden probably is a good idea, right? I mean, as one thing that somebody can do, while simultaneously knowing that in his immigration platform, he talks about not taking down any of the walls, increasing technologies, probably. So you probably see border budget. So it's definitely not a solution, but it does, that's one thing that somebody
It's a little bit, yeah.
It's a little bit, but the real task at hand is much more, and it's almost like what like first of all, the border has to become visible, right? Like when we talk about the hidden part of it, like we started this conversation with, it's got to be visible. Like it has to be, people have to see what it is and see how it's there to begin with, and what it does. Like the lack of like awareness around border deaths is amazing, and even like see how it manifests in your own community, or it could be in southern Arizona, but it could be another place, or even in your own self, right? And like how the border, like how we can begin to break borders could start right at this very second. Like, and it could even start by a conversation I have with somebody today, that I break through a border in my own mind, that I open up to somebody, or this kind of solidarity that we can build between people, especially the people that are most impacted by the border, like going and there's, I think in most places there's all kinds of things that you can do to really connect with people who are in these situations, and then but also keeping like this expanding apparatus. It goes on year after year with such little debate. It grows and grows and grows. It's just, I've been covering this stuff for so long, and one of the most amazing things is that it just continually increases with nobody saying anything, right? Wow. There's an appropriation process that happens every year, and it gets no coverage in the media. And then the people in the appropriations process, if you think about it, the appropriation committee, and the appropriations is how they determine the budgets, and okay. So that's so when that process is happening, then the big companies that get the contracts go and talk with the key congressional people that make the budgets, and then blah 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 blah, and then none of us are in that conversation. And it seems like, wow, there's got to be a way to stop this thing from growing constantly. And one thing I constantly think of is even like thinking of the word security. Like the biggest existential threat, to go back to is climate, climate change. And why are we spending, like in 2020, $25 billion on border and immigration? And that's the combination of CBP and ICE, that number, right. 25 billion. Why? And why couldn't that money be better used in terms for security, right? Like, why couldn't it go to a mitigation. I did this calculation of border, like what if the 21,000 border patrol agents, and this is, people probably think this is silly, but I'm going to say it anyhow. What if every day, like all 21,000, all they had to do was plant a tree? So you plant a tree, that's 21,000 trees being planted a day. If you plant it goes 65 years, and according to these authors of this study that look at like how trees capture carbon. So in 65 years, and this is, if you look at the projections of people being displaced due to climate change are astronomical over the next 65 years. But in 65 years, if that were to happen, 21,000 trees a day, you come to 500 billion trees in 65 years, and that would capture like a quarter of the carbon emissions that are in. So like, that's just an example of why it's not going to happen, right? Border Patrol's not going to turn into planting trees, but why can't we like assess the threats correctly? Right now, the threats are poor people, displaced people, often dispossessed people, by our own policies, by our own interventions abroad in a lot of ways. And why can't all this money go into, you know, healthcare? Why do people have to? Why does somebody have a coronavirus bill of $1 million, or they get bit by a cat and they have a bill of $50,000? Why can't it go into like student loans? Like, student loans are so trillions of dollars, right? I mean, I'm sure students might feel more secure if they didn't have a debt over their head and they could concentrate on other things. Why can't that money go into housing? Like there's a homeless crisis happening, and a roof over somebody's head, I would think, is one of the biggest thing. If you're going to think about security, that's huge. But you look at housing, it's been cut. Those budgets have been cut while the border budgets have been just growing and growing. And so there's just so many things and so many ways that we can think about to like address the situation, things that we can do right at this very moment, things that are more long-term things, but it involves like really thinking about, you know, how we are and what, you know, how we want to proceed. And it's really, I honestly think, and I have children, you have children, a lot of us have children and grandchildren, and we're thinking about our great-great-grandchildren and wanting them to inherit something that's beautiful, like from us, rather than something that's just in peril. And that really is what drives me so much now, having children, thinking about their lives and their future and their children, and just thinking in this sort of long term, in those like you think in the short term and the long term at the same time, and really like understanding that my actions can be in both places, and really thinking like, what is the best thing for my children's children, for my children. It breaks my heart, you know, to see this thing happening right now, and that it seems really that we can really put an effort into this to alleviate the real crises in the globe right now. And the border enforcement is diverting money away from that.
Everything. So we seem to have a little bit of a sound issue. I'm just asking Belisa if she heard anything. Part of what you said at the very end got garbled, but I think everything you're saying is so critically important. I mean, our survival really depends on pivoting around what we're privileging, and if we can't privilege human beings above border security, you know, expensive surveillance technologies and whatnot, then we're in trouble. And certainly the signs of it are everywhere. Mother Nature is letting us know that we're off course and we need to make some adjustments. So I wondered too, just in closing, because I know we're getting to time, you're one of the most like soft-spoken, you know, gentle seeming people that I've you know, encountered. And it's amazing to me that you spend so much time studying something that is so difficult and depressing and hard to you know, it's hard to place it, you know, it's hard to place what's happening in this book with any kind of future. Like, how is there going to be any kind of future if this is what's going on, you know, in our country and all over the world? So where do you put it, you know, holding all of this information in your mind, what do you do with it so that you can continue to envision a future for your children?
I mean, a lot of things that I do is a lot of, and the reason that I do the work that I do too and engage with this is that I really do believe the world is a beautiful place, and that it's very beautiful. It's like, I just drove through the desert earlier today, and to see like, the beautiful Tucson mountains and the saguaros coming down the slopes, and I just I'm constantly just overtaken by the beauty around us, and the relationships that we have, and the really, like, you're an artist, like creating art and the creativity that people have, and I really see, people as something much bigger and greater and much more beautiful than this reductionist border apparatus that reduces people to huge generalizations and dehumanizes, and so I really feel like it's important, and it gives me energy to go into that, to penetrate that, and to come out the other side, and to see the people on the other side and be enriched, and be and grow as a person from meeting these people that are on the other side of the border apparatus, right? And it just and it reaffirms this kind of, when I think like working towards my grandchildren, thinking about them, it's in that it has to create, obviously, I know that the world's evolving, and just like there's no maybe some people's utopia, and then but there's there's a much more beautiful world that can be created, where there's equalities and a richness and rich relationships, and that's what I strive for myself, but also my grandchildren, and generations going forth. And that really, I don't know, it's really a kind of it's my work has actually literally turned very spiritual for me in a way. My newest book, which I'm finishing up right now, has actually turned, I found myself going in those directions. It's called Build Bridges, Not Walls, and it's going to be coming out in 2021. But I found myself going in those other directions of there's a very spiritual direction. I guess I'll just leave it at that for now. But there's a very spiritual direction I find myself going in as well, and I just feel the need to like cultivate all of that, and understand that with when looking at all this like really kind of horrible stuff, at the same time, there's a potential of like the opposite, right? And just and building relationships to me is instead of blockading them with border walls, building them is a spiritual endeavor, and I think that's all that stuff really is really fueling me personally, to continue this work, and to be able to process and hold this information through a number of different lenses, and to not just like be overwhelmed by it, but to like look at it calmly, and be able to move forward, or attempt to like penetrate it in some sort of way.
I love hearing that. It's really, really energizing. And I'm hearing more artists and writers, thinkers, philosophers, even entrepreneurs having a similar discussion, that the work that you've been doing is taking on this spiritual aspect. It's almost like it's needing to alight in some ways, like we're actually all trying to reach a new vibrational level, because we need to sort of envision living in a different way and living in a different frequency. And it's exciting, to hear you say these things, because it echoes other things I've been hearing from people who are on similar paths. So I can't wait to read your new book, and also your play. You're writing a play.
Yes. The play, I'm not sure. Hopefully that it's the first draft of a script has been written on the play. It's based off the book Storming the Wall, but it's not Storming the Wall. It's based off of it. It's based off the broader concepts, but it's a play. So with characters, and a first draft has been written. It's making its rounds right now. I'm not sure when that will happen, but maybe in the 2021. there might be a stage reading, and I'll definitely let you know.
Oh, absolutely, definitely. And we put the link to your website. People can find out about all of your books on that website, right?
Sure, yeah, all of them are there.
Below this chat, and I highly recommend that you go out. Anyone who's watching this and will watch it, after this recording goes and read some of your material, because again, it's changed my understanding of things entirely. Like, you don't realize how much you don't know until you read one of these books and you kind of start understanding again this intricate system, which is important for us to comprehend and grasp on some level, because it's connected to everything. This is not limited to borders and bordering systems in the globe. It's a very, very intricate, interconnected web of information and culture and society and how we're living and how we're building our future. So it's really important reading. So thank you for doing this work so much, and thank you for taking the time today. And I am certain that we're going to have another conversation, hopefully very soon. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I look forward to our further conversations. This was great. A pleasure to talk to you, and I think I really enjoy having these sorts of conversations. So I look forward to more.
Likewise. All right. Be well.
Bye. Thank you.